The Long Road to Lavender Hill, Chapter 1, The Bruise Beneath the Surface. Elena didn't remember the exact moment her marriage turned into a cage. It didn't come with a slammed door or a broken bone. No, it started slower than that, like water wearing down stone. A comment here, a cruel laugh there. The way Darren would correct her in front of others, the way his voice would tighten when she got something wrong. At first, she thought it was her fault. He was tired, stressed. Work was hard. Money was tight. Maybe if she cooked better, smiled more, stayed quiet. Maybe then he'd stop looking at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe, but it didn't stop. It never stopped. What started as harsh words turned into isolation. Friends faded. Family grew distant. Darren made sure of that. He always had a reason why someone wasn't good for them, why they couldn't visit, why Elena didn't need anyone but him. He turned their home into a quiet prison, and slowly, Elena began to disappear inside it. The first time he shoved her, she dropped a glass on the kitchen floor. Lily was just a baby then, wailing in the high chair. Darren grabbed Elena by the shoulders and slammed her into the fridge. Not hard enough to leave a mark, just hard enough to make a point. He didn't say sorry. The second time he did. After that, the apologies stopped. By the time Lily turned 5, the bruises were easier to cover than the shame. Sometimes they came from a thrown remote, a backhand when dinner was late, a mistake he said she made. She stopped arguing, stopped crying, learned how to read his mood from the sound of his boots on the porch. The hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the fear, constant gnawing. The fear of saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong shirt, laughing too loud, being noticed. Because when Darren felt small, he made sure Elena felt smaller. And then there were the quiet days when he'd ignore her completely. No words, no eye contact. Like she was invisible in her own home. It was worse than shouting, worse than fists. It made her doubt she even existed. He never hurt Lily. Not directly. But Elena saw the way her daughter flinched at sudden noises, the way she shrank into herself when her father walked into the room, the way she clung to Elena at bedtime and whispered, "Don't leave me, Mommy." Some nights, Elena would sit on the bathroom floor holding a towel to a fresh bruise and stare at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked hollow, her skin looked pale, her mouth could barely shape a smile anymore. This isn't love, she thought. This is survival. Still, she stayed. Because he told her no one else would want her. Because he controlled the money, the car, the house. Because every time she tried to imagine leaving, that cold voice in her head whispered, "And go where? With what? Who would believe you?" But deep down, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, a small ember still burned. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something like it. A quiet voice she hadn't heard in years. A quiet voice she hadn't heard in years. One that said, "You don't have to die like this." Not slowly, not silently. She started hiding small amounts of cash in the lining of Lily's toy box, memorized the bus routes, kept a duffel bag tucked behind the laundry baskets in the back of the closet, and every night she waited. For the moment, the one she could run. It came sooner than she thought. Chapter 2, When the World Goes Quiet. It was raining the night Elena left. Not the dramatic kind of storm with thunder and lightning. Just a steady, soft rain, thin, cold, and endless. The kind that coated everything in silence. The kind of night where even the wind sounded like it was holding its breath. Darren came home late, drunk. She could smell it on him before he even walked through the door. Elena was in the kitchen, folding Lily's pajamas. She didn't look up when he entered. She'd learned not to. Looking him in the eye was sometimes enough to set him off. He stumbled past her and opened the fridge. "I left a plate in the oven," she said gently. "Kept it warm for you. You think I want dried up leftovers?" He slammed the oven door shut so hard the glass rattled. She didn't respond. She didn't breathe. Then came the shove, hard, sudden. Her hip cracked against the countertop. She gasped, but still she said nothing. His voice followed close behind. Useless. Another shove. Can't even keep a damn house. His breath was sour. His eyes bloodshot. She could smell rage on him like sweat. And then from the stairs, "Mommy." Lily's voice. Small, barely audible. Elena turned her head just enough to see her daughter's tiny figure in the hallway, holding a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide and wet. Darren froze. Elena braced herself for the worst, but instead of lunging or shouting, he just stared at the child. Then, without another word, he stormed out the back door and into the rain. The screen door slammed behind him. It was the moment Elena had been waiting for. She didn't hesitate. Heart pounding like a war drum in her chest, she rushed to Lily and scooped her up. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "It's okay. We're gonna go now." She moved fast, too fast to be afraid. The adrenaline made her hands steady, her mind sharp. She grabbed the duffel bag, the cash hidden in Lily's toy box, her ID. The small stash of food and bottled water she'd packed 2 weeks earlier in secret when she'd started letting herself believe escape was possible. She wrapped Lily in a thick blanket, slipped her boots on, grabbed the rabbit and shoved it into her daughter's arms. Outside, Darren's shadow passed near the garage. He hadn't seen them yet. She took the keys and opened the front door slowly, praying it wouldn't creak. The rain greeted them like a hush. Elena crouched low, carrying Lily through puddles, her heart hammering as she reached the car. She didn't turn the headlights on, didn't buckle her seatbelt, just started the engine and rolled away, her hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. It wasn't until they were 5 streets away that Lily whispered, "Where are we going?" Elena's voice trembled. "Somewhere better." She drove for hours. Back roads, side streets. Whenever she saw headlights behind her, her stomach dropped. Every car felt like it might be him. She stopped only once in a gas station parking lot to wipe the fog from the windshield and hold her daughter close. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, the rabbit clutched against her chest. Elena stared at her for a long moment. She looked so peaceful, so small, so trusting. It hit her then, not the fear, but the grief. The grief of what they were running from, the life they were leaving behind. The version of herself she had to let go of now forever. She didn't cry. There would be time for that later. Right now, she just drove. She didn't know where they were going. Just away, as far as the gas would take them. But somewhere in her chest, for the first time in years, there was silence. Not the terrifying kind she lived with in that house, but a new kind. The kind that whispered, "You did it. You're free." Chapter 3, Lavender Hill Guest House. By the time the car gave out, they had been on the road for nearly 2 days. The old sedan coughed and stuttered just as the sun broke over the hills. A sleepy fog still hung over the road like a veil, and Elena was so tired she could hardly tell if it was morning or if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The dashboard lights blinked erratically, and with one final wheeze, the car rolled to a stop on the shoulder of a narrow road just outside a small town. She stared at the steering wheel for a long moment. No panic, just numb acceptance. They had run out of road. The money was almost gone, the car was dead, and her body ached in places she hadn't even known could ache. "Where are we, Mommy?" Lily asked from the back seat, rubbing her eyes. Elena didn't know. But there, nestled between mist-covered hills and rows of tall trees, was a painted sign with curling letters. "Welcome to Fairbridge." The town looked like something out of a children's book. Quiet streets, white fences, shops with hand-painted windows. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where people waved to each other without thinking. Elena walked with Lily in her arms, the duffel slung over her shoulder, her shoes soaked through from the dew-drenched grass. They passed a flower shop, a bakery, a tiny library, no bigger than a single classroom. And then, just off the main road, they saw it. A large stone house wrapped in ivy with a crooked wooden sign that read, Lavender Hill Guest House, EST 1949. Elena hesitated. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. She didn't know if they had any rooms. She didn't even know if she could afford a room, but her legs moved before her doubt could stop them. The door creaked open and warm air washed over her, fresh bread, lilacs, and something like cinnamon. Good heavens, came a voice from inside. You poor souls. You look like you've walked through a storm. An older woman with silver curls and kind eyes stood at the foot of a staircase. She wore a long cardigan that looked hand-knit and had flour on her cheek. She looked like someone who knew how to listen. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came. The woman didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Elena moved slowly, gently guiding Lily inside. Her legs shook. Her throat burned. But she made it across the threshold. The woman took Lily's small hand and crouched beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," came the reply, barely above a whisper. "And what's yours?" the woman asked, turning to Elena. "Elena, I'm Mrs. Hartley." "You're safe now." Mrs. Hartley showed them to a small room at the end of the hall. The sheets were crisp, the windows clean. There were fresh flowers on the nightstand, lavender. "Don't worry about the money right now," she said gently. "We'll sort that out later." Elena sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were still trembling. She hadn't felt a mattress in days, and now even the softness felt foreign. Lily climbed in beside her, curling into her mother's side. Mrs. Hartley smiled. "Get some rest. I'll bring breakfast when you're ready." That night, after Lily drifted into a deep, safe sleep, Elena sat by the window and stared out over the quiet town. A dog barked in the distance. Wind rustled through the trees. No shouts, no broken glass, no footsteps coming down the hall. Just silence. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't terrifying. It was peaceful. She didn't know how long they would stay. She didn't know what came next. But in this moment, in this town called Fairbridge, in a guest house that smelled like lavender and bread, she finally let herself believe. Maybe they'd landed somewhere they could begin again. Maybe this was where the healing could start. Chapter 4, starting from scraps. The days that followed were slow. Not in the way time crawls when you're afraid, but in the way it unfolds when you're finally allowed to breathe. Elena and Lily stayed at Lavender Hill for what was supposed to be a night, then a week, then longer. Mrs. Hartley never asked for explanations. She had that kind of rare wisdom, knowing when to speak and when not to. She just kept feeding them. Soft-boiled eggs, buttered toast, apple pie that Lily devoured with quiet joy. Elena tried to help in the kitchen, tried to clean, but the older woman would always shoo her away with a knowing smile. Still, Elena couldn't rest forever. There was no money left, and she refused to let herself grow dependent again. She wanted to stand on her own feet this time, even if they were shaky. So she started small. The corner bakery needed help folding boxes and washing dishes. The pay was low, but the owner, a kind woman named Jessa, never asked questions when Elena showed up quiet and tired. Elena worked with her head down, hands steady, body still sore in places that remembered too much. But there was something comforting about the repetition. Clean, fold, stack, wipe, rinse, breathe. Her mind had been chaos for so long, even this kind of simplicity felt like healing. Meanwhile, Lily began attending the small local school. She clung to Elena the first few mornings, but the teachers were gentle, the classroom bright. There were books and colors and laughter, things Lily hadn't had enough of. Elena watched from a distance as her daughter slowly began to bloom again. It was in Lily's smiles that Elena found the strength to keep going. At night, after Lily fell asleep beside her with the stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, Elena would sit by the guest house window with a notebook in her lap. She wrote down every dollar spent, every small goal. Get shoes for Lily. Buy own shampoo. Find place to rent. Save for lawyer. She still flinched when the phone rang. Still checked the locks twice before bed. Still jumped at certain tones of voice in the grocery store. But each day she survived was proof she could do it again tomorrow. And slowly, without realizing it, Elena began to return to herself, not the version Darren broke, but someone older, wiser, sharper around the edges, but softer where it mattered. She wasn't healed. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she was free to try. One evening, after a long shift at the bakery, Elena returned to the guest house to find Lily on the front lawn, laughing, really laughing, as she tried to balance on a borrowed bicycle with a wobbling front wheel. Beside her, holding the seat gently, was a man in a flannel shirt and work boots. He was tall with rough hands and kind eyes, the kind that smiled before the mouth ever moved. He looked up as Elena approached and gave a warm, quiet nod. She's a quick learner. Elena hesitated. And then, for the first time in a long while, she smiled. Chapter 5. The Man in Flannel. His name was Graham. The man from the lawn. The one who'd steadied Lily on that rickety bike with hands firm enough to guide, but never grip. Mrs. Hartley introduced him over dinner one night casually, as if she hadn't noticed the way Elena had lingered by the kitchen doorway, watching the two of them that afternoon, as if she hadn't seen the flicker of conflict in Elena's eyes, the hope, the fear, the what if. Graham runs the hardware shop, she'd said, ladling soup into ceramic bowls, and does odd jobs around town when he's not working on that stubborn old truck of his. Elena offered him a polite smile. Graham nodded, quiet and respectful. He didn't try to shake her hand. Good, she thought. He understands boundaries. He didn't push. Not the next day or the next week. He didn't ask questions or pry into her life. When he saw her walking to work, he offered a simple wave. When Lily ran up to him with a daisy and called him Mr. Graham, he crouched down to accept it with the same care someone might show a diamond. There was something different about him, something Elena couldn't quite name at first. Maybe it was how he moved, always steady, never abrupt. Or maybe it was his silences, the kind that didn't feel like judgment or disinterest, but space. Space to breathe. Space to be. Most men she'd known filled silence with noise. Control. Graham didn't. He just waited. They began to cross paths more often, at the bakery, the school fence, the guest house garden. One evening, Elena found him repairing a broken bench outside Lavender Hill. Lily ran straight to him, talking about a school art project and how her teacher let her use glitter even though it gets everywhere. Graham listened like it was the most important news in the world. When Elena called Lily inside, Graham stood up, dusting his hands. "She's brave," he said softly. Elena nodded, not sure what to say. "You too," he added without looking directly at her. It knocked the air from her chest. Not because it was flattery, but because it was said plainly, like fact. No pity. No agenda. Just truth. One weekend, Graham invited them to see his workshop. He offered, not insisted. Lily's eyes lit up, and Elena agreed, though every step toward his shop felt like walking across ice. But when they arrived, the space was warm, cluttered, safe, with shavings on the floor, tools neatly hung, the scent of cedar and oil. Lily sat on a stool and watched in awe as Graham carved a tiny bird from a block of wood. "She likes being here," Elena said, arms crossed, watching from a distance. "I'm glad," Graham replied without turning around. No one should grow up afraid of the world. Elena didn't respond, but her silence was different this time. It wasn't fear. It was opening. That night, after Lily fell asleep with the wooden bird on her nightstand, Elena stared at the ceiling for a long time. She didn't know what this was becoming. She didn't know if she was ready for it to be anything at all. But for the first time in a long time, the thought of someone didn't feel like danger. It didn't feel like chains. It felt like possibility, and that terrified her. But it also made her feel alive. Chapter 6, The Past Always Knocks. It started with a knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. 3 short raps at the front door of the bakery just before closing time. Elena's hands froze mid-wipe on the counter. There was something about that rhythm, something too familiar. It made the back of her neck tighten. Jessa, the owner, peered out the front window, shrugged, and went to answer. Elena stayed in the back, her breath shallow. Her body still remembered things her brain tried to forget. And then she heard it. The voice. "I'm looking for my wife." Every muscle in her body locked. Darren had found her. Somehow. After all these months, after the careful hiding, the name changes, the cash-only transactions, the erasure of her online presence, he had found her. He'd probably started with her sister. Maybe one of her old friends cracked under pressure. Maybe it was a license plate caught on a traffic cam. It didn't matter. He was here now, and Elena's breath vanished into her chest like it had never belonged there. Jess's voice was calm, firm. "I think you've got the wrong place, sir." A pause. Then Darren, sharper, "She's got brown hair. A little girl, about 5. That's my daughter." Silence. Elena slowly, quietly slipped out the side door. She didn't run. She couldn't. Her legs felt like lead. By the time she made it back to the guest house, Lily was playing with chalk on the sidewalk, drawing a sun with stick arms and a rabbit. "Inside," Elena said, scooping her up with a force that made the chalk scatter. "Mommy, now." Lily clung to her without question. That night, Elena didn't sleep. She locked the door, closed the curtains, then opened them again to check, then closed them once more. Her heartbeat never slowed. Her ears caught every creak, every groan of the old house. Her body was in full alert, fight or flight, even as Lily slept peacefully beside her. She didn't tell Mrs. Hartley, didn't tell Graham, because she already knew what came next. The waiting, the dread, the quiet paranoia that came with knowing he was out there now, close. He came back 2 days later. This time, Elena saw him herself. He was standing across the street from the school, leaning against a car she didn't recognize, watching. He hadn't seen her yet, but she recognized the tilt of his head, the way his hands sat in his jacket pockets, clenched like fists. That posture never changed. She turned on her heel and walked straight to Graham's shop. Graham saw it in her face before she said a word. "He's here," she whispered. Graham didn't ask who. He just put down his tools and walked around the workbench. "Where?" he asked quietly. She told him. "Lily safe at school?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once. "Then let's keep it that way." Graham wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. But there was a weight in him now, like steel under flannel. He walked with her back to the school, said nothing, just watched, waited. Darren wasn't there anymore, but the fear was the feeling of being hunted. Later that evening, Elena found herself in Graham's shop again. She hadn't meant to go there. She just ended up there, her fingers shaking, her breath uneven. He handed her a mug of tea without speaking, sat nearby but not too close, then finally said, "You don't have to run this time." She looked at him. "You don't know him." "I don't need to," he said softly. "I've seen what he did to you, and how you move, and how you flinch. That's enough." She didn't cry. She couldn't. The fear had dried her out. But when he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a slip of paper, a contact for a woman named Teresa, who specialized in family law and protective orders, her hand trembled as she took it. That night, Elena stood at the window again. But this time she wasn't watching the street. She was watching Lily sleep. Safe, warm, unaware. And this time the fear in her chest came with something else. Fire, because she wasn't going to let Darren win. Not again. Chapter 7, The Weight of Paper Walls. The waiting room smelled like plastic and old coffee. The chairs were too stiff. The lights too bright. Elena sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, wrists crossed like they used to be when Darren would grab them hard enough to bruise. Lily was at school, unaware that her mother was about to walk into a courtroom, not for a trial, not yet, but for something called an emergency protective order. The phrase made it sound official, solid, but as the lawyer, Teresa, had warned her, these are just paper walls. Better than nothing. Not a guarantee. It had taken everything in Elena to walk into that office, to say it out loud, to write it down, to sign the forms that detailed every broken rib, every slap that echoed off drywall. Every night she curled her body around Lily like a shield, to say his name. She felt exposed, like someone had peeled her skin back to look at her bones. But Teresa had been patient. She didn't flinch when Elena stumbled over the details. She didn't rush her. She just listened, took notes, and said quietly, "You're doing the hardest part already. You left. You stayed gone." Elena didn't feel brave. She felt like she might throw up. The judge's office was small, more like a conference room than a courtroom. The judge was kind but distant, professional, not personal. He asked questions Elena had prepared for, others she hadn't. Why didn't you file police reports sooner? Why did you wait this long to request protection? Do you have any witnesses to the abuse? She wanted to scream. Because what witness? Who had been there at 2 a.m. when Darren ripped the blanket off her and dragged her out of bed? Who had heard him whisper those threats in the hallway while Lily was crying in the next room? Abusers didn't work in daylight. They didn't leave marks that showed. They knew exactly how far they could go. She answered quietly, carefully, the way survivors always learn to. The order was granted, temporary, good for 30 days. A printed piece of paper with Darren's full name and a command to stay 300 feet away. If he violated it, she could call the police. She held it in her hands afterward, trembling, not because it made her feel safe, but because it made it real. He was real. The threat was real. And now the system knew it too. Graham was waiting outside when she stepped into the sun. He didn't say anything, just offered her the coffee he'd brought, still warm. "It's done," she said quietly. He nodded. "Good. It doesn't feel like anything changed." He looked down the street, then back at her. Not everything changes on paper. Some things change in you. She didn't speak, just sipped her coffee and stared at the folded order in her hand. Paper walls. But it was more than she'd had before. And it was only the beginning. That night, Elena tucked Lily into bed and lay down beside her. She ran her fingers gently through her daughter's hair. Lily stirred. "You okay, Mommy?" Elena smiled. "Yeah, baby. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how strong girls are." Lily yawned. "You're strong too." Elena closed her eyes, held her daughter a little tighter, and whispered into the quiet, "I'm getting there." Chapter 8, Splinters and Roots. Graham showed up at the guest house one Saturday morning with a pair of work gloves and a quiet smile. "I thought we could fix that garden bed out back," he said, motioning to the warped wooden frame Elena had barely noticed in the yard. "Unless you've got other plans." Elena hesitated. She didn't know why she hesitated. She could have said no. She could have invented a reason. But instead, she glanced toward the back window and said, "I guess it could use some love." Graham didn't smile like it was a victory. He just nodded once, like a man who understood patience. They spent the morning in the dirt. Lily played nearby, drawing smiley faces on rocks with markers. The sun was gentle, the air warm enough to pull her sleeves up. Graham let her use his tools, showed her how to lift the rotting boards without snapping them, let her fumble her way through things instead of correcting her. He asked questions, but never too personal. He asked about her favorite flowers, her favorite season, her favorite childhood memory, never about Darren, never about Court. When she made a joke, a real one, about how she once thought carrots grew on trees, he laughed, not politely, but genuinely. And the sound of it made her stomach flutter in a way that terrified her. After lunch, Lily went down for a nap, sun-drunk and peaceful. Elena sat on the back steps, brushing dirt from under her fingernails. Graham handed her a bottle of water and sat beside her, careful not to be too close. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said after a long silence, his voice low. "A garden bed. A Saturday." She looked at him. "But it helps." He met her eyes then. Steady, unflinching. "I'm not here to fix you, Elena," he said. "I just want to stand beside you while you do it yourself." Her throat tightened, but she'd never heard that before. Not from anyone. The next day, he dropped off a small pot of lavender for Lily's windowsill with a note in careful handwriting. "Roots matter. So does sunlight." Elena stared at the pot for a long time after Lily had run off to admire it. She touched the leaves, watched how they leaned gently toward the light. For years, she had bent away from it, flinching, hiding, shrinking from every warmth that felt like it might burn. But this was different. This wasn't a fire. It was something softer. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe she could grow here too. Chapter 9, Ashes at the Doorstep. It was just after sunset when she saw it. A smudge of black across the porch railing. Charred. Small. Almost insignificant, but unmistakable. Ashes. And at the center, half burned, was the little wooden bird Graham had carved for Lily. Elena's breath hitched. She crouched down slowly, her hands trembling as she lifted the soot-covered remains. The curve of the wing was still there, barely singed. She stood slowly, her eyes scanning the street. No car, no figure, no Darren in sight. But he had been here. He had come close enough to touch something that mattered, and then tried to destroy it. The police arrived 10 minutes after she called. They walked the perimeter, took photos, nodded sympathetically, but there wasn't a witness. No footage, no physical proof he'd broken the protective order. "He didn't technically threaten you," the officer said, eyes on his notepad. Elena stared at him, her fists clenched at her sides. "He burned something my daughter sleeps next to every night," she said, voice low. "I understand," the officer replied too quickly. "We'll file a report. But unless he makes direct contact—" "Then what good is this?" she snapped, pulling the folded order from her coat pocket. "It's paper. That's all it is." The officer sighed. "We'll increase patrols. That's all we can do right now." Elena turned away, not to cry, but because she needed the rage to settle somewhere that wouldn't make her crumble. Graham came the moment she called. He didn't knock. He didn't ask questions. He walked straight to the porch, looked down at the ashes, then turned to her, his eyes dark with something quiet and dangerous. "This changes things," he said. "I know. Are you thinking about running again?" She hesitated. The fear inside her wanted to scream yes, but something else pushed against it, something louder than it used to be. "No," she said. "Not this time." They installed cameras the next morning. Graham brought friends, people from town who didn't ask questions, only nodded and got to work. One replaced the locks. One mounted motion lights. A quiet woman named Marla even offered to watch Lily after school just in case. Elena didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to carry kindness like this without feeling the impulse to run from it. But she stayed. She let them help. And when Graham stayed late to walk the perimeter again with her flashlight in hand, she said the words that had been crawling up her throat for days. "I'm tired of being afraid." He didn't respond right away, just reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded square of paper, and handed it to her. It was a copy of her protective order. But beneath it, he'd written something in blue ink. "Paper burns, but you don't." Elena looked at him. She didn't flinch when he reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're stronger than you think," he said. And this time she believed him. That night, Elena didn't sleep with the lights on. She lay beside Lily, one hand on her daughter's back, the other gripping the note Graham had given her. Darren could threaten her. He could throw shadows at her doorstep. But this time she wasn't alone. This time she had roots. And she was done running. Chapter 10, Storms Don't Last. The confrontation didn't happen like a movie. There was no thunderstorm, no dramatic standoff, no screams in the street. It was quiet. Darren showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena was picking Lily up from school. She spotted him across the parking lot, standing beside a car she didn't recognize, hands in his pockets, waiting like he had every right to be there. Lily ran to her, unaware, wrapped her arms around Elena's legs. "Elena," Darren called out. She stood still for a breath, just one. And then she picked Lily up with one arm and reached into her coat with the other. The camera Graham had given her was already recording. "Don't take another step," she said. Darren smirked. "I just want to talk." "You don't get to. This is my daughter, too." "No," Elena said, her voice sharper now. "She's not your leverage. She's not your excuse. She's safe. And you don't get to come near her again." Other parents were watching now. A teacher stepped outside. Darren glanced around, suddenly aware he was no longer invisible. No longer the one pulling strings behind closed doors. "She's going to know who I am someday," he said, his voice low. Elena stared at him, then shook her head. "She'll know exactly who you are," she said. "And she'll know who I became to protect her from you." The police were already on their way. The footage was enough to press charges, enough to hold him accountable for violating the protective order again. But even as they put him in cuffs, Darren still wore that same sneer. It didn't matter, because for the first time he wasn't the storm anymore. She was, and she was standing her ground. 2 weeks later, Elena sat in the backyard garden, surrounded by new blooms. The lavender pot Graham had given them sat proudly on the windowsill, reaching toward the sky. The court extended the protective order to 5 years. She filed for full custody with evidence, support, and a legal team who finally listened, and she was approved. No more running, no more hiding. Graham sat across from her on the grass, a lemonade in his hand, dirt still under his fingernails from building Lily a tiny swing in the tree. "You okay?" he asked. Elena nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." He smiled. "You know," she said, looking at the garden bed, "I didn't think anything would ever grow in me again. After everything. But it did." "You did," he corrected gently. They sat in silence for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because some moments deserved to breathe. That night, Lily curled up between them on the porch swing, half asleep, holding the new bird Graham had carved. "You think it's going to rain again?" she mumbled. Elena looked up at the stars, bright and clean. "Maybe," she said, "but we're not afraid of storms anymore." And she meant it, because storms don't last, but survivors do. The end. Short epilogue. Some stories don't end with a final battle. They end with peace. With a woman who no longer flinches when she hears footsteps behind her. With a child who sleeps through the night without clutching her mother's shirt. With a man who didn't swoop in to save the day, but chose instead to walk beside her until she could save herself. Elena didn't win because the system worked perfectly. She won because she didn't give up, because she built a life from the ashes. because she chose roots instead of fear. And because in the end, survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something stronger, something gentler, something free.